I'd like to welcome our industry partners to today's Drug Development Roundtable. On the call with us, we have Abby Bronson from Edgewise Therapeutics, Anne Bruns from PTC, Robert from NS Pharma, Nick from PTC, Jonathan from NS Pharma, and David from BioMarin. We're very excited to have you here today. The purpose of this roundtable is to allow our community an opportunity to hear directly from industry on what's happening in the drug development space for Duchenne. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to turn the time over to Dr. Apkon to lead tonight's discussion.
Thanks, Marissa. So this is fun for me because I don't have to actually do all the talking. I get to ask the questions. Thank you all for joining us today. I know that families or people with Duchenne dystrophy are excited to hear a little bit about what's going on in your world. What I would love I guess to start is I'm not going to say each of you, but from each of the companies, if one of you, I think there's a couple people from a couple different companies, but if one of you each will just take, say, 4 or 5 minutes just to sort of share a little bit about who you are, who your company is, and really kind of what you are doing within the Duchenne space. And then I can sort of then moderate and ask some more specific questions of each of you. So I'm going to start with, I guess, David Neal. Dr. Neal, would you mind introducing yourself and share with us a little bit about you and BioMarin?
Yes, of course. Well, thank you, and a real pleasure to be here. So my personal journey actually started there is as a medical doctor in the UK, and from there I moved to the regulatory environment, and that was really where I had my first insight into neuromuscular diseases in general and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. From there, I transitioned to research and development roles in the pharmaceutical industry, and I've now spent more than 10 years researching potential new therapies for neuromuscular indications, including Duchenne. The past 2 years have been has extensive history in developing novel therapies for rare genetic diseases, and of course, including Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Its journey in DMD started many years ago, as some of you may know, with the previous antisense oligonucleotide, and since then we've learned a lot and we're constantly trying to improve potential new therapies, and we're excited to have another antisense oligonucleotide readying IND submission, so we'll be excited to hopefully start clinical trials in the near future.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to ask, I think we have Jonathan and Robert, both of you from NS Pharma. If one of you wants to jump in and introduce yourself and what's going on with NS Pharma these days.
Go ahead, Robert.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Rozier, and I'm a Director of Medical Affairs at NS Pharma. And my career actually started in neuroscience. I was an electrophysiologist by training. So I recorded the electrical properties of nerve cells, experience modifying the brain. And I decided to use those skills in a pharmaceutical setting while working in a neuroscience department for a company called Wyeth Neuroscience. Wyeth was bought by Pfizer, and I sort of tumbled out of there and moved over to the clinical side. So I went from discovering drugs to working on therapies that were either approved already or in clinical trials. And at NS Pharma, I wear several different hats. One is engaging with the community as a medical representative. I also sit on a promotional review committee, so all of the marketing materials and so on pass through a filter for which I'm the medical representative. Also legal and regulatory sit on those committees, and then I'm responsible for our data dissemination, so presentations at conferences like the MDA conference last March, and we'll be there again this March. So I help develop the posters and manuscripts for NS Pharma.
Just
Great.
I'm Jonathan Cabral. I'm U.S. Head of Patient Services for NS Pharma. That means I work on something called the Hub, responsible for helping manage the patient journey of getting patients on and keeping them on. I also have responsibility for advocacy and a field-based group called our Patient Engagement Leads that are patient and caregiver facing. I've been in healthcare my whole life, surrounded by physicians and nurses. Chose to come to this side, really been on the commercial side. I have approximately 32 years of experience. During that time, I've been with 6 or 7 different startups, and I've been involved in somewhere about 18 or 19 different product launches. Quite frankly, a couple didn't make it through the FDA, which was really unfortunate because there was profound need. I've been with NS Pharma for just over 3 years. I'm from the Boston area, and I moved from Boston to Nyack, New York, and I work in Paramus, New Jersey. A couple things about me. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Mastrandrea, you introduce.
That was pretty good pronunciation. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick, and I'm a senior medical science liaison with PTC Therapeutics. We're certainly not new to the Duchenne space, but personally, my PhD and both of my postdoctoral fellowships were focused on oncology. And so when this opportunity presented itself, I joined PTC with admittedly the thought that maybe I would go back to oncology after a year or two. And so next month marks 4 years at PTC, and I've loved, being involved in this disease state. It's been a privilege to see how much has advanced in the last 4 years, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the next 4 years brings for us. We got our start in Duchenne with the discovery of Atelorn, and we haven't quit trying to bring that to U.S. patients. And in addition to Atelorn, we acquired Emflaza, deflazacort in 2017, and continue to provide that commercially to patients in the U.S. as well. I'm joined by Anne Bruns. So she is patient engagement, and her job is to incorporate your needs and voice into our clinical trials, whereas I'm involved more with engaging clinicians like Dr. Apkon and Dr. Shea with the goal of advancing care for patients with Duchenne. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And then finally, Dr. Bronson, want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Abby Bronson. And first of all, thank you very much for having us. And Dr. Apkon, I also really liked the talk that you just gave. I have to make a correction. I am not a doctor, but I'm honored that I got that title today. So I'm the VP of Patient Advocacy at Edgewise Therapeutics, and we're based in Boulder, Colorado. We've been around since about 2017. And our CSO, Chief Scientific Officer, had been studying muscle diseases for a long time and really took kind of a different approach and wanted to attack it from a different angle. And so we're taking a very biophysical approach, like really looking at the biomechanics of how muscles are breaking down. And that's the basics of our approach that we're taking for the treatment that we're studying in Duchenne. My personal journey with Duchenne, I think I've been in this space since about 2009. And I started actually at Children's National Medical Center in an academic lab where a lot of research was going on. And I made my way from there to NIH, where I worked for a doctor that used to be at NINDS there. And then I worked at PPMD for about 5 years. And now I'm heading up the patient advocacy role at Edgewise. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about what we're doing.
Great. Thank you all. I just want to, Anne, you're on. I just want to give you 2 minutes to also just introduce yourself. I know your colleague briefly did, but why don't we go ahead and have you say a few words?
Oh, well, thank you. Yes, thrilled to be here tonight. Thank you. I've been with PTC for almost 4 years. I first started here working our patient engagement for the Duchenne community, and now I manage all of our advocacy pipeline efforts. And, you know, my start with Duchenne, getting introduced to the community, was I'm a caregiver to my own child that has a rare disease, and I used to actually join PTC's some of their educational events to talk about creating a care team and how to be an advocate for your child. And so fell in love with the community. And so it was just a great opportunity to come over to PTC and start more with them, and still working with some of our current clinical trials within the Duchenne community. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, y'all, for your introductions. You know, I think it's just a gentle reminder that we have a really engaged group of partners, industry partners in the Duchenne space. Super bright people. Abby, you should have a PhD if you don't. I thought you did. I apologize. But I mean, just super bright people who understand the basics of Duchenne, you know, at the muscle level, but I think also at the bigger picture, understand who these kids and families are, and that greater impact of having someone with a child or yourself having Duchenne muscular dystrophy, the impact it can have on your lives. So thank you all for being here and for being so willing to chat. I'm going to go ahead and just ask randomly, just sort of ask a couple of questions of you. So I'm going to start with maybe Dr. Neal. If you could just talk a little bit about what you see are the biggest challenges in drug development in the setting of Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
Certainly. Well, there's no denying that Duchenne is a complicated disease, and in your last presentation, actually, we were hearing some of the new areas of research and an acknowledgement that we still don't know everything there is to know. That said, within specifically clinical trials in Duchenne, I think I'll start with two particular challenges I see. One is how we measure efficacy. How do we really establish that a drug is doing what we want it to do? And the tools we have available to do that are in some cases not ideal, perhaps not sensitive to change as we'd like them to be. I think it's a real area of opportunity, though, and one where we'll maybe talk about later in terms of where we think things might be going, hopefully for the better. I think another area I would make a comment on is that for every patient with Duchenne, their individual disease progression will be different. We'll call that variability, and person-to-person variability in clinical trials can represent a challenge in terms of trying to conduct a trial with as few patients as possible and minimize exposure to placebo, for example, and really trying to detect changes, and that can be made much more difficult in a clinical trial setting with that variability. So those are just two thoughts I'll start with.
I appreciate that. Could you just comment a little bit? I mean, I, as a rehab physician, you know, working so closely with therapists, the outcome measures for me are function-based. There again, time up and go, climb 4 stairs, walk, run 10 meters. Can you talk just briefly about sort of the, on the dystrophin side, so measuring dystrophin and some of the maybe challenges that you've or the community's experienced with that?
Certainly. Well, dystrophin we accept as, to some extent, a biomarker, if you will. It's certainly the protein that is either completely absent or reduced in the condition itself. So we are obviously trying to see changes there. That first and foremost involves muscle biopsies typically. That's very invasive for the patients who take part in the trials, and we obviously would prefer to avoid that. There are some techniques there, for example, needle biopsies or using ultrasound to guide the needle to make, or the biopsy site to make sure we're obtaining samples of muscle correctly. But that's a problem. I think the other area with dystrophin that can be a challenge is the assay itself. So the assay meaning how we measure or quantify the amount of dystrophin that's there. That can sometimes be a technical challenge too, and it varies between different companies or different sponsors or research groups. And sometimes if you want to draw a comparison between different treatment options, for example, that can maybe be a difficulty when not all the ways of measuring dystrophin has been described in exactly the same way.
Yeah, thanks. I think we certainly see that with, there's 2 FDA-approved drugs for exon skipping and, maybe slightly different measures or technologies that were used to measure the muscle biopsy results. And it's always an interesting conversation I have with families when that comes up. Dr. Crozier, any additional comments when you think about the biggest challenges in Duchenne, Duchenne drug development these days? What do you think about?
Sure, and maybe to pick up on some of the comments that Dr. Neal made, I think the small number of patients in DMD or in any rare disease makes enrollment in a timely fashion difficult. If you look on clinicaltrials.gov, you'll often see that it takes years for what may seem like a relatively short trial to complete. And I think it's because of the challenges of enrolling, particularly if you're looking at a mutation-specific study. It can be difficult to enroll enough patients in a timely fashion. I think also the number of sites that are capable or willing to participate in trials can mean that patients have to travel a long way. I know Dr. Atkan, you were touching on some of the issues with traveling and buying gas and food and whatnot. And the distances themselves can be a problem for people and maybe a discouraging factor for people enrolling in trials. And lastly, I think we all acknowledge the regulatory requirements for placebo-controlled studies. I know that this is a bit of a hot button issue, but something that I also wanted to mention.
Thank you. Dr. Mastrandrea, can you talk a little bit about where you see DMD treatments going over the next 5 years?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite topics to discuss. But I ultimately believe, and I think the field would agree, that this is a monogenic disease. There's one mutation, but it is multisystemic. It affects much more than just muscle tissue. We know that heart, lung, brain, bone health is at play, and so I look forward to a better understanding of how these other systems are affected by the absence of dystrophin and what other interventions we can add on to help patients with respect to those disease systems. And ultimately what I'm getting at, and I think my colleagues would agree here, is that the end target is likely going to be rational polypharmacy, meaning it will not be one cure, one intervention. It will likely be a combination of things to address how complex this disease is. And so I look forward to better understanding the biology of the disease so that we can begin to develop more interventions.
Thanks. That's an important point. I think Dr. Shea, someone in the audience had asked a question about, following gene therapy, could you come off your corticosteroids? And his answer was he's not done that. As we think about, some of the interventions that are out there probably are not targeting the heart, as an example. So as a clinician, I too think about this as a kind of a cocktail approach, where you may be on multiple medications that are sort of approaching this condition from various different directions. I appreciate your thoughts on that. Abby, could you talk a little bit about how we can get more patients with Duchenne access to the exciting drugs in development, or I would add that are FDA approved already?
That's a great question. I kind of see that in 2 parts a little bit. So maybe I'll start with, first of all, how can we make trials easier and more accessible to more patients? And there's so many things I think that we as a community are working on right now. I think there's a lot of, I think you mentioned in your talk, are the ways that we can do more things at home, like blood draws. And in fact, we are looking at a device where we might be able to do blood draws in the home, actually, not even locally. So that would really reduce burden. But I think we're looking at outcome measures that are based on activity monitors, anything that we can do at the home to make it easier for patients to participate. I think also, I think listening to the patients more and meeting them where they are, like really understanding what their barriers are. I don't think any one family is the same, and each family is going to have different needs. And so I think more boots on the ground, more us going out and trying to really listen to different patients, different pockets of patients, if you will, and trying to understand how we could help them, reduce those barriers so that they could get into clinical trials. And I think then there's always, and this is an issue that I think all clinical trials are dealing with, is the issue of diversity and equity, and how can we bring trials to those patient populations which typically they just don't participate. Like, I mean, I just went to an event this past weekend, and it was a very homogeneous group of families that was in the room. And how do we really get into those communities, the Black communities, the Hispanic communities? And I think what we're doing right now, translating into Spanish, is a great start. And so I think that we all need to work on this. And if every company can do their part, I think we'll make a dent little by little. So those are just a few ideas.
Thanks, Abby. And do you have any other comments about how we can get more patients with Duchenne access to either treatments or clinical trials?
Absolutely, thank you. And I just want to, first of all, just thank everyone who even considers participating in a clinical trial, and those who do participate. We know that Duchenne affects an entire family, not just the patient, and it takes a lot for a family to participate. It's not easy. Clinical trials are not easy, and so thank you for all of those who are improving research for the entire Duchenne community now and for those to come as well. I think it really starts with being connected. We know that not every patient sees maybe a specialist or is in a location of a center of excellence or has access to appropriate care teams as all. So getting connected with the advocacy groups, with community members to learn what's going on, being able to take that information to your physician and saying, I've heard about this clinical trial. Do you think it's something that I might be able to participate in? Or I've heard about this approved medication. Do you think it fits what my personal journey is like? So I think the more that families can educate themselves and get connected to learn what options are out there, then they can really take that and work with their physician to see what works for them. Not every clinical trial will fit every patient. And so finding what works for that particular patient and their family will be really important to tailor it to their needs. And then just helping, the community can help just share that information just so that it is able to get across to those who might be interested.
Yeah, and I appreciate you kind of reinforcing the need to go back to your either primary care provider or your neuromuscular team. The biggest barrier to non-participation in a clinical trial is not knowing the clinical trial actually exists. And that is whether you are from a dominant race or ethnicity or white, or you are underrepresented in clinical trials, being Black or brown. That really not knowing of the existence of the trial is the biggest barrier. So thank you for reinforcing that.
Sure.
I'm going to go back to Dr. Neal. I want to go back to that question actually that I asked someone else. Where do you see DMD treatment going in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Sorry, there was an echo. Can you hear me? Okay. I think the comment that was made on combination therapies, I think, is a really good one, and I think that one of the most exciting things right now in the field is that there's so much research. So there are almost certainly in the next 5 years going to be more available treatment options, which is great news. And it means that we'll have to try and, I would hope, expand trials and research to patient populations within Duchenne who perhaps are not currently served by those medicines. So a lot of research tends to focus on younger ambulatory patients, for example. I think there's a great deal of room to look at other stages of disease, non-ambulatory being one, and maybe involvement of the heart muscle, I think you mentioned already. I think there's also perhaps room to explore very young children as well, in a way to sort of prevent some of the initial muscle damage if we have an effective therapy that's found to be safe. It's another area to explore. perhaps as well. And I think you touched on in your previous talk, Dr. Apcon, about maybe better understanding of genotype, phenotype, and how we can really target therapies much more directly to appropriate patients.
To any of you as researchers, any movement towards targeting the dystrophin at the brain? So we had someone in the last session ask about his or her son who is autistic. We talked about intellectual disability, anxiety. Is there anyone targeting the brain dystrophin isoforms? I'm going to take that as a no. Dr.
I could hop in for a bit, so certainly no plans to answer your question, and certainly no data that speaks to this. Atelorn does cross the blood-brain barrier, and so presumably there could be partial or some level of restoration with dystrophin and some of the isoforms in the brain. But one of the advances that I had mentioned about understanding this disease better is from the behavioral and cognitive standpoint. So it may not necessarily require dystrophin to be reintroduced or replaced in the brain, as long as we have other interventions that can address some of the brain and behavior and cognition aspects of the disease. And so I know that there are some clinicians that are really writing the book on how do we handle some of the brain and behavior symptoms of this disease. And I do look forward to seeing improvements in other interventions.
As a former neuroscientist, or maybe I still am, this was a topic of conversation for us because all of our drugs we wanted to get into the brain. I worked on Alzheimer's disease specifically, and but this was an antibody, and getting that antibody across the blood-brain barrier was a major topic of conversation amongst the chemists and biologists of how do we maintain the properties of a drug. So while we don't have any specific plans for Viltepso, the challenge in and of itself of having a drug cross the blood-brain barrier and potential off-target effects that may have is a real challenge for the field. Certainly one worth looking into, but a difficult one at that.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, I'm going to ask this next question of you. What are you doing, or PTC or the community doing, to get patients and families more involved in the Duchenne drug development process? So as you're thinking about bringing a drug to market and you're in the early stages, how are you engaging, or how should we engage patients with Duchenne or families in the process?
So I think it's a great question. And I think to bring together, we're in the process of evolving and creating truly a patient council and also a caregiving council, two distinct ones. And it's no secret that we have a licensing contract for the new Capricor product. It's a very different type of product, right? It's an ultra cold chain product, much like the Moderna COVID products that has to be delivered at minus 160 degrees. It will be an infusion, but every 3 months, not every week. So we have to dialogue and look at three questions. What's working, what's not working. So what's working, let's keep doing it and making it better. What's not working, either fix it or stop doing it. And then thirdly, and it's a bit tougher, is what's missing. And how do you know that? And there's knocks the whole world can hear. And then there's much more subtle knocks of what's missing. And you really have to get close and stay close with the community and keeping your fingers on the pulse of what's happening. We use the term a lot, the patient journey. But the fact of the matter is, there is no one patient journey. Our youngest patient is 2. Our oldest patient is 30. And everything in the middle, from living in rural to urban, Spanish speaking, English speaking, other languages. So you have to develop and understand a customized set of an ecosystem for care that is as prescriptive as possible for serving incredibly specific needs. And the only way you can do that is by listening and getting close, recognizing the different ecosystems. Is the child on the spectrum? Yes or no? Are parents divorced, living in different states? Yes or no? All these different things that we try to get close and stay close with our patient engagement leads, with the hub, and partnering up with advocacy and quite frankly with the MDA doing a great job.
Thank you very much for that. That answer is really thoughtful. And Abby, I would love to hear from you as well. Kind of what are you doing, or what should we be doing to get those patients and families more involved?
I can't answer what should we be doing. There's no roadmap. I think this whole idea of patient-focused drug development is just evolving. I mean, it's really exciting because I think the regulators are very much aware about how much the patient voice can add to the whole risk-benefit framework. That's the ultimate question that we're answering when we do clinical trials, we collect all this data, this outcome measure, we submit it to the FDA, and they have to decide, are the benefits worth the risk? Well, if they don't understand what they call the therapeutic context, which is how serious is this disease from the patient's voice, what are the symptoms, what's it like to live with the disease? Those are the kinds of things that are really starting to make a difference in the process. So at Edgewise, what we're trying to do, we started when we were earlier in development, we were just trying to understand the patients. And we started in Becker, which actually has been really fun and interesting because you think, oh, it's just mild Duchenne, but actually it's a serious disease. And there's still a lot of, unmet need in that disease that we're seeing. So we started doing focus groups and just trying to understand sort of at a very qualitative level that patient journey, if I can use that term, but what it was like, what were the symptoms like, what are the unmet needs, what's most bothersome to the patients. And then as we're moving closer and we get farther along in development and starting our trials, we're starting to pinpoint the questions more. So then we did a more formal patient experience mapping project. And we categorized it by disease state, and we got qualitative information trying to really understand the disease journey by those stages of disease. And now, as we're approaching clinical trials, we're designing instruments and surveys to actually evaluate different outcome measures, like how clinically meaningful is a particular outcome measure? Is it going to help us interpret the data? Things like that. We're considering doing exit interviews. So all those types of things where we're gathering patient insights along the way, and as we get more specific and focused in on a trial, we can actually target the questions more. Those are the types of things we're doing. But we're considering a patient council as well. We work with all the advocacy organizations. So those are the types of things that we're doing.
Dr. Afghan, can I make a follow-on comment? Having worked in different therapeutic areas, having worked in the AIDS community, which provides a proxy for, kind of a cocktail of therapies. I think as an industry, as a group within Duchenne, we're a little behind in engagement with a very important stakeholder set, and that is the payers. We spend all this time getting these products approved. I think we need to do a better job engaging earlier, including now. What do we want them to do with this portfolio of products that are coming? What does finish look like? The treatment guidelines for Duchenne have not been updated on a pre-Exondys approval basis. There's literally 2 sentences describing exon skipping therapies as an emerging new, treatment opportunity. It doesn't even recognize or acknowledge that there's been 4 products approved in that class now. And so just because they're approved doesn't mean the payer is going to pay. And as somebody who has responsibility for that area, it's all about evidence-based medicine and disease modification. But I do think in Duchenne, in the other neuromuscular diseases, there is a little bit of a disadvantage with accelerated approvals vis-a-vis, say, the oncology products. Every insurance company pays for those products. Not 100% of the boys who have been enrolled in our program are essentially getting a prescription for Viltepso are on product. And yet here we have products that are both statistically and clinically meaningful, right? And yet some of the payers don't want to pay. What's that going to look like when there's, 10, 20 products on the market for Duchenne? How are they expected to pay from? What should their expectations be from us? So I do think we need to engage them earlier and start collaborating with them as well. I think we're a little behind in that regard, and it's an opportunity for industry working really through MDA to accelerate that conversation.
I appreciate that comment, and I'm sort of smiling as you were talking about it. For the audience, I think it's important to sort of reinforce this idea that you just made, Jonathan. Just because the FDA approves a drug, and I as a physician have the ability to sign a prescription to allow that child to get it, doesn't mean that an insurance company is going to pay for it. In fact, it is incredibly challenging to get an insurance company, public or private, to pay for some of these novel treatments. I think being proactive is important. I think bringing the patient and family voice into the conversation is important as well. Again, for the audience, just to sort of give a concrete example, when a new drug is approved, whatever there are now 4 exon skipping drugs. When we submit to an insurance company, oftentimes the insurance company wants to approve it only if the child meets the age and the inclusion criteria of that particular clinical trial. So for example, if the clinical trial that informed the FDA approval enrolled boys 5 to 10 who are ambulatory, who did the 10-meter walk in less than 8 seconds, then the insurance company will approve if you meet that narrow criteria. If you're a boy who's 11, who's still walking, or 12 or 15 or 20 who's not walking, they will most frequently deny the approval. And then that sets up a whole, peer-to-peer conversations and pulling data and all sorts of other, headaches that we as providers go through to help support the child getting these drugs. So I think my ask of our industry partners here is, as you're thinking about clinical trials, as best as possible, whether it's in one trial or more likely in parallel trials, including as wide a range as possible. The gene therapy trials, as an example, are enrolling not only ambulatory, but non-ambulatory in 2 separate trials. But if we can show evidence in some of these older boys who are non-ambulatory or men, it'll be much easier to get approval. Does anyone else, I'd like to open the mic up. Does anyone else have any comments about this particular issue?
I just wanted to add on, and I think, that, Dr. Neal said it best in the beginning, discussing challenges with drug development, and go back to, this is a very heterogeneous disease, or he used the word variable. It's very variable, and so that can make detecting efficacy in a trial difficult when so many patients behave very differently through their journey with Duchenne. And so that forces industry partners to slim down that clinical trial window to have a more homogeneous patient population. But I agree, Dr. Apcon, that while that is important and we need to do that to demonstrate efficacy for the FDA, I do think that in general we can do a better job of increasing inclusion based on age and or functional ability or disability.
Thank you. I'm going to just transition to the last question, and then I want to give time for people in the audience to ask questions. I'm going to start actually with you, Dr. Neal. We talked about some of the challenges in drug development in the setting of Duchenne. Can you talk about what you're most excited about regarding drug development in the area of Duchenne?
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think my biggest excitement comes from the huge amount of activity in this space. The fact that we're all on this call right now, for example, is testament to just, there's a lot going on. And I think that's reason to be excited, reason to be hopeful, and hopefully that will result in new treatments coming online in the near future. I think on top of that, I think I mentioned one of the challenges being measurement. I'm excited for the progress we're seeing, both in terms of the technology, wearable technologies, for example, some of the very novel imaging methodologies which are coming through to try and serve as more sensitive tools to detect change in efficacy. I think that's exciting too. And of course, really having the huge amount of patient engagement and very sophisticated patient advocacy groups. We've talked a lot about how important the patient voice is in our drug development process and how we can incorporate those learnings in both the design of our trials and the conduct of the trials. I think the fact that there is such a sophisticated network globally in the Duchenne community is something to be excited about. So 3 comments.
Thank you. Dr. Crozier, do you want to answer that question?
Well, as always, Dr. Neal steals my points, but he made very excellent points. I think, every time I attend a conference, I'm always blown away by many of our competitors' presentations. I think the field is rife with a lot of very interesting products that are coming our way. Of course, I work for NS Pharma, so I'm very excited about the exon skipping therapies that we have coming along, hopefully exon 44 and 50, starting in the very near future. I think Nick mentioned it, these sort of non-dystrophin approaches enable a wider band of patients. For example, the CAP-1002 trial called HOPE-3 that Jonathan had mentioned is, first of all, addressing older patients. Most of them are 10 years of age and older. Many have limited ambulatory ability, or they have lost their ability to walk. And because it's not mutation specific, it can include many more types of patients, not just the HOPE-3 study, but other studies like this that address the downstream effects of the dystrophin mutation. And personally, I'm very interested in the CRISPR-Cas9 approach. It has in my view, the best chance to correct fully in many different types of mutations in the dystrophin gene. There are a lot of safety concerns with that. And 2 fields that I'm watching are sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia. I think the CRISPR-Cas9 approach is being applied in those 2 areas. So I think as a field, we can watch how I think it's CRISPR-Cas9, but the CRISPR technology is being applied in those fields, and see what kind of results emerge from those studies.
Great, thank you. And finally, I'm going to ask the same question of you, Dr. Mastrandrea. What's exciting you about the field right now?
Yeah, I don't know if I can add too much new, but certainly to reiterate Dr. Neal and Crozier's statements, I am looking forward to, what we as a field understand better, and therefore how that may influence, and improve the development of drugs or interventions otherwise for patients with Duchenne. I do commend companies for sharing data specifically regarding safety data, and I do think that we can all do a better job making sure that we're sharing the information that we should be sharing when we take these patients into account. And so I do look forward to hopefully continued collaborations on that front between industry partners.
Thank you. I would echo that last comment about sharing the safety data. I think it's especially important when we talk about some potential higher risk trials, including the gene therapy. It's important that we understand sort of across all types of gene therapy what the similar risks may be, or what may be a little bit different. So as a clinician, that really is important to me. So in these last few minutes, I guess I would love to just hear any final thoughts. I'm going to hand it over to you, Anne. Do you have any final thoughts, things that either we didn't talk about, I didn't ask, that you'd like to sort of share with the audience, again, families or people with Duchenne, kind of as it relates to clinical trials, research, approval process, things like that?
Sure, and I'll just kind of go off the question that was just answered. I think what's exciting to me is that the community is so involved in drug development. And just, over the last 5-6 years, the amount of families that I see coming to conferences and educational events increases every year, even throughout COVID and, things being virtual. So the appetite for learning is there. And I think as sponsors, all of us have the responsibility to teach this drug development process. Of course, we're all aiming for success, but ultimately we want our families to know how this process works. And, in case something fails, they understand it, and then they're more receptive to something else coming along. So I see that happening, and I see families getting excited about research and more apt to joining, a clinical trial. And then I think just, something that you shared before this panel started, we don't know what we don't know. So please share with us. The best way that we learn is for patients and parents to tell us everything from, if it's finances around joining the clinical trial, never assume you can't join. Always ask. There's ways to think about what a sponsor is doing, how a clinic can help support this family. So, share with us everything that you're going through. Not only, what's at home, it's hard if you are working and you can't take time off, or if you have to have babysitting. These are the things we need to understand to build our trials to be very patient friendly. And, for us, it's not just the patient journey or a clinical trial, it's this patient experience throughout this entire process. And, I think at PTC, we like to look at it as, customer service. They are the most important stakeholders. They're a most important member of this equation. And what can we do to make this experience better for you? So just please share anything you can with anyone you meet within this industry.
Thanks, Anne. Abby, I'll hand it over to you. Any last comments?
Oh gosh, everyone. Well, first of all, one thing I'm excited about is that I work with such great people and colleagues across sponsors, because you guys have said everything that I would say, but like just what Anne said, we don't know what we don't know. So if you have an out of the box idea about how to reach patients better, or some idea that would, help us get people into trials more, we are all ears. So, I just remember, I started in 2009 in this space, and it has just consistently grown, and people don't leave because there's always more work to do, but we're going to get there. That's what I will say. I mean, we're all in it together, and there's more work to do, and we will get there. So
Thank you for that bright outlook. I appreciate that. Jonathan, any last words from you?
Yeah, I want the parents to be super hopeful. In 1998, I was fortunate enough to work for a company called Centocor that launched a product, a monoclonal antibody for rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease. And at the time, this was heady stuff, these autoimmune diseases, Crohn's, rheumatoid arthritis, so on and so forth. And there were 2 or 3 in the late 90s. And today there's a dozen products that are life-altering. I don't think I know. You can just feel it, that we are on the precipice of great things in the Duchenne community. And when you go to the annual conferences of advocacy groups, including MDA and others, there's literally 2-3 dozen companies that are pursuing treatments in this space. And I think it's fantastic. And I'm just excited about what the future brings. And I know every parent out there, and I'm a father of 4, you want a treatment for your child today. And I totally get it. And I think everybody's working so hard. So the future looks bright, and keep the faith, and we're doing our best.
I think I may end with those words. I think that that's just a wonderful sentiment, Jonathan. I really appreciate that. I want to thank all of you for participating in the panel today and bringing your insights. We have some brilliant researchers here and brilliant patient advocates and family advocates. And I think it takes clinicians, researchers, patient advocates, and most importantly, our families to really be successful in this quest for the best treatments for boys and men with Duchenne. Thank you to MDA. Thank you to Marissa for helping to put this symposium together. I know there's a day 2 tomorrow, and I'm excited for that as well. I do want to thank quickly the interpreters. I am so grateful that you joined us today to make this information, knowledge available to all of our patients, or at least many more of our patients. And so again, thank you. So Marissa, I'm going to hand it to you to wrap things up.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Apcon, and thank you to all of our industry partners who participated tonight. It was really such a great discussion and a great note to kind of end today on. I would like to again echo thanks to our presenters, to Paul Melmeyer and Dr. Shea, Dr. Apcon, and our industry representatives. We appreciate your time, your expertise, and everything that you do for the Duchenne community. I would also like to echo Dr. Apcon and say thank you to our interpreters today. We really appreciate all of their hard work and that they were here today to provide live interpretation. We also want to thank again our symposium supporters, BioMarin, Edgewise Therapeutics, NS Pharma, PTC, Sarepta, Entrada, and REGENXBIO. Their support really helps to make our programs possible. So thank you very much.